Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. I'll do our little intro here in order of importance, I think. So, unfortunately, a couple days ago as we're recording this, my sister got rushed to the hospital. She was having, severe chest pains. So, checking out everything to do with heart and everything like that. Not actually sure of don't have a diagnosis yet, but she's been in the hospital for a couple days now, so they don't keep you around unless, they figure there's something that needs observing. So, yeah, that's going on in the background. It explains why I didn't watch anything this week. I had planned to watch a movie this week, but of course, wanted to look after the niece and nephew and, make sure my brother-in-law was getting enough rest and all that type of stuff. So, yeah, that's been going on. Hopefully everything's going to be okay there, as far as we know. She's doing fine as of the moment. So, yeah, that was that. And then I did have some significant progress on my apartment. For anyone who is wondering about that thing, yes, still at my parents' place, still in the makeshift setup, as you can hear on the audio only, and as you can see on YouTube with the lack of anything on YouTube to look at. So, yeah. Drywall's going in. I've picked out my flooring. It's going to be like a 2-week wait for flooring supplies to get delivered. So I think my 6-week estimate from last week is probably pretty accurate, to be honest. Probably be about another 5 weeks until I'm back in there.
We'll see.
We shall see.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah. So that's what's been going on over in Rob's corner. How about Tom?
Well, I left to go on my bicycle ride this morning, and it was wet out there, and you're lucky that we don't have video on YouTube, because I would be showing you the road rash on my arm.
Yeah, we might have to go 18 plus or something for the gore.
I know. It's terrible. Anyways, bike's fine. That's what all the cyclists want to know, so I'll tell you that. The bike seems to be fine. I'm going to take it into the shop and have the derailleur hanger checked. I'm pretty sure it's straight, but it did slide a little bit, but I was mostly underneath it as it was sliding. So
you protected that bike.
I heal and the bike doesn't. So
right.
Yeah, I'm pretty banged up, but nothing too bad. I mean,
geez.
I was only going about 18, 20 miles an hour when I hit this stupid. Basically, it's wet, and I was taking a corner that I've taken 1,000 times before, didn't even think anything of it, and as I went back to kind of figure out what happened, there's a tree, so it was probably dropping whatever crap underneath it, and then when I came around the corner, I hit something slick, and the bike just slid out from underneath me. So nobody's fault, whatever. So that's that.
Bad times. Just know that in the background, Tom is experiencing physical agony right now.
I am actually. I landed on my right side. Last time I hit the ground, I landed on my left, and it's so much easier when you land on your non-dominant side.
Right.
You could just kind of sit there with your, that side of your body just kind of relaxed as
you're just evening things out here. That's what you're doing.
No, yeah. So I have a scar on my left shoulder from when I hit the ground that time, but this time I didn't even hit my shoulder at all. It went on my elbow and my hip. So the bib I have, which is the shorts that I wore, were completely undamaged, but underneath, not so much. So I did get to order some new gloves, and which is always exciting. I need to check my helmet because I felt like it was scraping, but I didn't check it. All right, and then I did watch stuff this weekend or this week because whatever.
Because you have a home theater. That's part of it.
I did. I forgot to write down the She-Hulk.
Okay.
TV shows, I finished She-Hulk, and I finished Shadow and Bone on Netflix. Shadow and Bone's already got a second season announced. That's not a surprise. Production values were very high. Writing was fairly good. I will say, I've always been sort of annoyed by TV shows and movies that show maps, so that where what's it called, the one that they just rebooted or they're doing a prequel to,
Game of Thrones,
right?
House
Game
of
of Thrones,
the
they always have the map, right? And they kind of scroll around and they show you. This show needed a map so damn bad.
Shadow and Bone?
I really don't know where I am. I'm not sure.
Okay.
They're all talking about these places, and I'm like, I don't quite understand where anything is. I need a map. I need you to show me on there. So it's a little bit confusing, and it kind of ended as you would expect the first book of a series to end, with a good resolution, but definitely open to more stories. So there is a second season. I did like it. Jessie Lee, I think is her name, is the main character. Who just, it's always, what I said about Luke Cage and Jessica Jones and the Marvel movies, like the Marvel TV shows. It's like Jessica Jones, the actor who played her, carried that show, whereas Luke Cage, the actor who played that, in my opinion, could not. Jessie Lee, or whatever her name is, that plays the main character, whose name I cannot remember right now, in Shadow and Bone, absolutely nailed it. She was amazing.
Good.
And all the rest of the characters were all sort of interesting. They could have had more arcs. It seemed a little bit shallow overall, but the whole story and the special effects and everything else, I think, was very, very good. So if you're into sort of fantasy with sort of a Russian aesthetic, if you think about what typical, with the toques or whatever those hats are called or whatever, and they had sort of that aesthetic. This is a very good series to check out. I did finish She-Hulk. The last episode of She-Hulk ended almost as I was watching, I'm like, this is why actually episodes like this is my least favorite episodes or issues of the comics, because when she gets super meta is when I'm like, okay, it gets super meta for the very last episode, which was it was so true to form, and there were so many things in that episode that was like, this is absolutely nailing everything that She-Hulk is, and kind of ties the story up exactly as you might expect it to if you are a fan of the original comic. But it's just not my favorite. I like the meta commentary to be a little bit more, out of the side of your mouth and less hitting you in the face with a baseball bat. So
it seemed as though quite a few of the people who were critiquing the show critically, saying that they didn't like it very much, definitely.
That's because they were getting called out on it, 100%. When there were lines in this movie that was the TV show was like, they wrote this long before anybody said it online, and it is word for word exactly what people were saying online. I'm like, they called out the trolls and the misogynists and the racists and the sexist and everybody else, all these online people whose entire personality is just, if it's not white and male, I hate it. If it was not built for me.
It's so easy to write that ahead of time into a show.
I was like, I actually stopped the show and looked at my wife and my son and went, they wrote this a year ago. Okay,
right.
They didn't just pull this from the headlines.
Indeed.
This was written a long time ago, and they are absolutely killing it. So I thought that was great. So I very much liked it, and even though that wasn't my favorite episode of the entire thing, the show as a whole I thought was very true to the comic. In fact, I actually met up with my son who's in college this weekend, and I asked him if he had been watching. He said no, but he had heard some stuff about it. And I told him, I asked him, what have you heard? And he said some stuff. I'm like, these are all the reasons why everything that you have heard is wrong, and the people who are saying it are not the fans that they claim to be. Because if they had been, then they would know. All right, so as far as movies go, I watched Rosaline, which is on Hulu. That's probably on Crave or something for you, which is a romantic comedy set in the time, or set in the Romeo and Juliet storyline.
Okay.
Rosaline was Romeo's ex-girlfriend that he dumped to go after Juliet, and it's from her perspective. And there's a lot of the same things that happen. If you're familiar with the play, and of course everybody should be at least have a passing familiarity. I mean, I haven't read it in 30 years, and I still remember. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that happening during the play and stuff like that. So there's a lot of the play going on around it.
Okay.
But it's sort of her trying to get Romeo back. And
good luck.
Yeah, you gotta know how that's gonna end. But it was cute. I felt like it could have been. I don't know. I felt like it could have been funnier, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't that it wasn't funny. I just felt like there could have been almost more slapstick about it. Like you watch
Was
something
this
like
live action or animated?
No, it's live action.
I feel like I remember a Rosaline animated show of some kind, but
yeah, it could have been.
It's not that.
But after seeing something like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, making the comparison between this, which is like a lighthearted romantic comedy, and that, which is just I think Tom Stoppard is the one who wrote that, just an insanely good piece of literary work. It's this felt like it felt a little shallow for me. But it was my wife and son liked it. It was very cute. I think overall the story arc was well developed and done. So, and again the main characters, the two love interests, Rosaline and Dario. I think Dario is his name. Both I thought did very well. Though it was kind of distracting that the male. Not protagonist. What is it? Ingenue? Is that what it is? I don't know. Anyways, he looked a little bit too much like the older soccer player on the Apple TV Plus show. It's Jay.
Oh yes. From Ted Lasso?
Ted Lasso, yeah. And my son's like, is that the same actor? I'm like, no, it's not the same guy. Are you sure it's not the same? It's not the same guy. But he looked a little bit too much like that, which was fine. Lastly, I did watch New Mutants on Disney Plus. I will admit that I started with a beer in my hand and I ended with a drink in my hand. So I cannot say for sure that I paid attention to every single second of this movie. I will say, if you've ever watched or experienced something where you felt like it really was or could have been very cool, but then something happened and it wasn't, that was this movie.
I mean, New Mutants was supposed to be kind of like a soft reboot of the X-Men franchise, but then like it was commissioned before Fox got bought by Disney, and then it sat on a shelf for years until Disney decided to finally release it because there was like a contract in place that they basically had to release it in some form, but then there was the pandemic and it was just like everything's just a mess.
So the beginning of that movie jumps around in ways where you're like, I don't understand how these characters got from point A to point B. Like they were in a room and now they're in a completely different room, and it's night and it's day and it's the next day. It's a week late. I mean, it's like it is completely disjointed at the very beginning of it, and you could see. I really felt like there was a storyline that was going to happen that was very targeted, and then it just sort of devolved into nothing.
I mean, originally they had wanted it to be like a full-on horror movie.
Well, I really wish they had gotten, because they started that way and it really felt good, and then it just
they scaled it way back to feel much more like all the other X-Men films.
Yeah, which is not something you should be looking forward to. I mean, it got
lots of questions.
It got pooped on, and there was a really good reason for it. I did sit through it. The main character and the actor from Game of Thrones who played what's her name, who's Rain in this, I thought did very well. They were the two main ones in there, and
Maisie Williams, right?
Yeah, and they were both very good. So I mean, it's a shame. It's a shame that somebody would put that they would have this group of actors. And this was Anna Taylor-Joy before anybody knew who the heck she was.
Yeah, she looks a lot younger there than the year that it came out.
Yeah, before the Queen's Gambit and all that stuff.
Yep.
And she is absolutely wasted on this movie.
I mean, I'm betting with the whole multiverse thing that like Maisie Williams and Anya Taylor-Joy, if they can get them to agree, very well might show up in the MCU because they would love to have those actors in there.
Yeah, it's a shame. This movie is like an hour and a half, and I think it literally is an hour and a half of just potential. Just wasted. All right, AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get it answered. All you have to do is ask by emailing us a question at avrant.com. You can go to our website. You can see our like to see the show notes for our episodes and previous episodes, listen to our old episodes as well. There'll be links to Flickr albums so you can follow along with the pictures. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant. Contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter's @FirstReflect. I'm Tom @avrant.com. My Twitter's @avrant_Tom. I want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, support the podcast in some way. If you want to do that financially, you can go to avrant.com and click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. And 2 people did that this week. That we got donations from Stefan and Andrew. So thank you very much to Stefan and Andrew.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's PayPal donations, one-time donations you can make through the website avrant.com. So big thank you to Stefan and Andrew for sending us some money via PayPal.
Yeah. We also have a Patreon set up at patreon.com/AVRant podcast, I think.
That's right. It's the long one. Everything except for YouTube is AVRant podcast.
I know. I forget sometimes. I've had a lot of coffee because I've been sitting around here just pulsating with pain.
Yes, so, trying to ignore the pain.
I have taken a handful of Advil. So
that'll do it too.
139 patrons over at patreon.com.
Yeah.
Every month, a little bit of money is taken from them. And I think a minimum of $1, you specify. And the bulk of it is given to us. So 139 of you, thank you very much.
Yeah, once again, that is patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 139 patrons over there.
All right. We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going during everything. Just the things.
Yep.
All the
times.
stuff.
I'm just going to say it's the times now.
The times. That's right. We are past the heady days of the news being a half an hour to an hour long and them having to just concentrate on the biggest stories. And instead, every single thing that anybody says could be considered news by somebody else, they put it as a headline. Like, people mad about whatever episode of the British Breaking Show. And I watched the episode and went, this is exactly what they do to everybody else. I understand what the deal is. I was like so underwhelmed by the drama. So we got notes of gratitude from Shawn, Keshaun, Infinite Gary, Dazz, Mark, who says he enjoys our YouTube videos. Good on you, mate. Stefan, Kris, who says we're still his favorite podcast of all time, and Rafael. So thank you for thanking us.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much to Shawn, Keshaun, Infinite Gary, Dazz, Mark, Stefan, Kris, and Rafael. We very much appreciate those notes of gratitude to us, notes of encouragement. Very much appreciated. So, thank you all very much. Thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
So we've got some news here. The European Union plans to update their energy efficiency index in March 2023. The current energy requirements, including maximum power consumption limits, were put in place in 2021. For some reason, 8K TVs and micro-LED displays have been exempt, but if and when the new regulations come into effect, they'll be limited to the same maximum power draw as 2021's 1080p HD TVs. So, everything, whatever. 4K TVs will also have to meet 2021's HD TV figures, and HD TVs will have to draw even less power. By the figures outlined, no current 8K TVs or micro LED TVs would pass. The vast majority of today's 4K TVs won't have any problem fitting below the new limits, but some of the brightest 4K LCD TVs would exceed the new 2023 regulations. However, the vital details in all of this is that the power regulations ratings only apply to the default out-of-the-box performance of the TV. Might we get color-accurate TVs out of the box? You can go, you can manually go into the settings and put the TV into picture mode that sometimes drastically exceeds the maximum power consumption rating as long as you acknowledge a warning. So the claims that this could mean the end of 8K TVs or 8K TVs might be banned in the EU is definitely an exaggeration. No, the internet exaggerates, who would have guessed. Manufacturers can simply ship them in aggressive power saver mode. They'll look awful and dim, but easily pass the new regulations. Or they could put them in accurate color modes that aren't in torch mode. And,
Yeah, I mean, the OLEDs that you buy today are definitely shipping in a power saver mode. So, turning off the power saving feature is the way to actually make HDR look like HDR on OLED television. So that is, as Lee said when he first got his OLED, he's like, that's the make your TV look crummy mode that it ships in, but it is to meet power regulation standards. So essentially, in the EU, in the European Union, those power regulation standards are just getting more stringent. They do list a maximum power draw, based on screen size and screen type, including what the resolution is. For some reason, higher resolution's allowed to draw more power, but yeah, not so much once these new things affect. So of course everybody latched on because they saw what the power draw is of most of the 8K TVs out there that are exceeding these figures that the EU has outlined starting in March 2023. So they're like, well, that's going to mean nobody can buy an 8K TV. I'm like, nah, it's the one default picture mode that comes out of the box, so it's not that difficult to dim the TV down and get in just under. Because right now they're coming in just under. They're getting a letter grade of G. Okay, they're worse than a fail. They're worse than an F. That's what TVs are already at today. Like, yeah, that's what they'll do. They'll come in 1 watt under the regulations. So
it's amazing what they'll be able to accomplish once they know a regulation is coming, and how they'll be able to get the. Everybody's like, "This is it. We'll never have another TV." Yes, that's surely going to be the answer. They're just all going to go. You know what? We're done. Samsung, Sony, we're not making TVs anymore.
Yeah, they're not going to stop 8K TVs. The full array local dimming, I guess, helps them even more here because they can just dim it down to 1/8 power, and that's the default mode. And there you go. We slipped in under the requirements.
Yeah, it was funny. I was walking through Sam's the other day, and from a distance, like I'm like a quarter of the way across the store. And if you know how big Sam's are, they're insanely huge. So I'm like about as far away as you can get from the TVs and still see them. And there was like all these rows of TVs, right? And they all look exactly the same. And there's one TV that is like the blacks are actually black.
Oh, okay.
Right? And I look down and it's smaller than every other TV and about twice the price. I'm like,
there you go.
I'm like, oh God, that's the one TV they can't get rid of. And even from here, I can tell how much better it is.
Right. But most people are looking at how bright it is, not how good the black is.
That's right. Some changes are coming to Netflix for those of you who have been living under a rock, because everybody's talking about it. The easy one first, starting in November, the basic plan, one stream only for $10 a month. We'll get a bump up to 720p resolution instead of the current 480p limit. Next up, 12 countries will be getting the new basic with ads tier, and that'll be in early November. This will also be a single stream only in 720p resolution for $7 a month in the USA, $6 in Canada, £5 in the UK, and €4 to €6 in the EU. Approximately 5 minutes worth of 15 to 30 second commercials will play every hour with ads at the beginning and during shows and movies. Netflix estimates that between 5 and 10% of their catalog won't be available due to licensing restrictions, and you cannot download anything for offline viewing. And lastly, they've tried to put a darkly humorous, at least to us, spin on their efforts to curtail password sharing. Starting this week, using profile transfer, you can turn a profile within an existing account into its own standalone account with its own separate subscription and payment while retaining that profile's watch list history and game progress. As Netflix puts it, people move, families grow, relationships end, but throughout these life changes, your Netflix experience should stay the same. Now pay us more money. Sure, whatever. I mean, it doesn't affect me. I don't know.
I mean, I just love that. Just like relationships end, but Netflix will still be here. I'm like, that's your
take.
Actual spin. Yeah. It's like get off of my account. Stop sharing my password. We aren't together anymore. That's their sell. That's why you should pay more.
So Audiaholics got the skinny on how Denon and Marantz will be handling the addition of Dirac room correction. They have clearly stated they intend to release a firmware update in March 2023 that will make it possible for the newly announced models to use Dirac Live. All older models are out of luck. They cannot support Dirac whatsoever. Dirac Live Limited, correction stops at 500 Hz, nothing above that, is currently expected to cost $260. Although ultimately the pricing is up to Dirac, so that could potentially change. Dirac Live Full is priced at $350. If you pay for Dirac Live Limited first, you can later upgrade to Dirac Live Full for another $99.
So you would save $10 by getting Dirac Live Full right from the jump.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So you need to supply your own mic to use Dirac. You cannot use the included Odyssey mic. They recommend the U-Mic 1. My God, dude, this deal just keeps getting better and better. It's like, this is the Darth Vader moment of this whole thing. I pray I don't alter the deal any further. The March 2023 update will not support Dirac Live bass management. They actually said they haven't even started on the integration efforts for that yet, but they expect to be able to add it in 2024. So, you know, as far as the internet people are concerned, that is a done deal. And as far as I'm concerned, I will believe it when I see it.
I mean, I guess they've been watching Emotiva and how voraciously their fans still defend them. So they're like, hey, we can wait 2 years to deliver a promise.
Let's just start promising crap.
That's right.
And in fact, it's a Skinnerian response is what they're looking for. Like they have been using a Pavlovian response, which is you give them the treat, and then they and then they recognize that they'll get treats if they pay the money. Now they're like, well, we might give you the treat if you pay the money, and then that's a Skinnerian response is what they're looking for here, because it's much more powerful, and that is true. That is like. Skinnerian responses have been shown to be more powerful than Pavlovian responses, which makes no sense because Pavlovian responses, you actually get the thing. Yeah, anyways, let's not go too far down that rabbit hole. You cannot use any portion of Odyssey and Dirac together. They run completely separately. There's no way to apply, say, Odyssey Dynamic EQ while the Dirac is being used. It's one or the other. You can use the 2 speaker presets to store an Odyssey correction in one preset and the Dirac correction in the other preset, and apparently they're still only providing 2 preset memory slots, not 4, like most other receivers and pre-pros that support Dirac Live. And lastly, Dirac's spatial room correction is just a vague potential future feature at this point. They say they'll continue to work with the Dirac team on any and all future solutions and releases, but it's just too early to commit to anything completely new, such as Dirac spatial room correction. Boy, I couldn't be less excited about this.
I mean, what we can say is that when you buy a new Denon Marantz AV receiver, it'll have Odyssey.
Yes,
that we can be sure of.
I will give you a little heads up. Andrew and I are working on an article about Odyssey versus Dirac that is specifically targeted at the people who say it's Dirac or nothing. Dirac is the new shiny thing, and I must have it.
It's a real shame that the bass management, the Dirac Live bass management, is like. Not only is it wait for the firmware update in supposedly the first quarter of 2023, but it's like, we haven't even started on integrating that yet, and it won't be until at least 2024. And it's like, but it's available. It's out on things already, and you guys are Sound United. I think that one, honestly, I was quite shocked at that. The spatial room correction thing, no surprise there, because nobody has that. That's not an official thing released by Dirac yet. So I certainly am not going to blame Denon and Marantz for what they said about that one. But the bass management, and they've got the 4 subwoofers with the ability to do 4 independent subwoofers. It's kind of a waste to have that and then not have Dirac Live bass management. So out of all of this, is that the most important feature? Not really. You can still do a very good job with regular, a single mono sub output and do things multi-sub that way. But that was probably the most disappointing one to me, just because I'm like, okay, we've got the AV receiver with the 4 independent outputs. You could do a really good job with the Dirac Live bass management, and then it's not coming until at least 2024, and we're not going to hold our breath for that one at all.
Yeah. I am definitely not holding my breath. Yeah. Got some comments here. I guess here's a correction. Matthew Poe got a win, or Poes? It's got to be Poe, right?
It's Poes. Yep.
Got wind of our Dirac spatial room correction discussion from last week, and he wanted to clarify a couple of things because we referred to his discussion on Audioholics with Gene. We'll just read his comment verbatim to make sure we don't create any further misunderstandings. Quote, "Hey guys, I appreciate you covering my Dirac presentation. I think there was some misunderstanding around this. For one, that data came from the Dirac AES paper, and it's a simulation of what would happen if you did this. It's not real in real data, in real measurement data."
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to put measurement to say that, it's data, it's just not measurement data. Right. So I threw the word in there so that we're clear.
Think of it like EASE, Enhanced Acoustic Simulator for Engineers modeling, but a little more sophisticated. There is no summing to mono or changing bass to mono. It isn't playing bass through all the speakers like you think. In fact, this concept will allow full multi-channel bass. It is simply canceling the reflections at a specific reflection source. Directional basis maintained. End quote. Okay.
So the really important thing is, this wasn't real world measurements, which I did say, and I misspoke on that, and I misunderstood on that. I thought there had been real world measurements done. It's like, no, everything that was shown in the graphs last week was simulated. So that is pretty key, because we definitely want to have real world measurements after this and make sure that it's doing what the simulations predict. Although the simulations are sophisticated, like it says, and there's no reason that they should be completely way out to lunch, but we are still waiting on real world measurements to actually confirm all of that. The second part, though, I completely understand how we probably misspoke about it or weren't clear enough in what we were saying. I wasn't saying that it was summing the bass from any given channel to mono, because like that's what we do now, right? We take the bass from any of the channels that are set to small, that all gets summed to mono and sent out of a single subwoofer output as it is today. This one is like, they refer to all the other speakers in the system as support speakers. So when I was saying that all the speakers are used to play all the bass, and I think that's the phrase that probably I wasn't clear enough on. It's not that like all the speakers are playing all the bass together in mono. It's that all the speakers are used, like all the speakers will make some sort of sound in response to the bass from any individual channel, because all the other speakers are, like we mentioned, acting as active bass traps in a sense. So when I was saying all the speakers are used to play all the bass, I wasn't meaning sum together in mono. I was meaning that today, if you set your front left and right speakers to large and full range, and then there's a sound that's only in the front left speaker, it will only emanate from the front left speaker. None of the other speakers will be making any sound. But with the spatial room correction, all of the other speakers will be making some kind of sound to cancel out the reflections in the room. So that's, I think, where the phrasing just got misconstrued there. So great correction. We want to have this stuff as close to accurate as we can, like we're talking about. At this point, it's all simulation, off in the future, not something you can go out and buy just yet today.
Right. Someday, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Kris, unfortunately, had a bad experience with the Screen Innovations 120-inch Black Diamond zero-edge projection screen. It was very expensive, but he was happy with its performance until a significant problem arose. It somehow developed small bumps that looked like blisters all over the screen. He's never never let anything touch the screen other than a very light touch with a dusting wand a couple of times. But the biggest problem is that Screen Innovations has been very unresponsive. They haven't replied to his contact efforts to try and get some help with this, which has really soured him on the brand. We had said to go with a Loon Vision. Now he's wishing he had. I have no idea what could have caused that, other than some sort of delamination. I mean, but
yeah, that's what it sounds like.
I mean, but why? I mean, other than heat I would think would do it, but
or just a glue failure.
Yeah, I suppose.
Which, I mean, heat would be the most likely culprit to cause anything like that, but occasionally there are just a manufacturing defect. But if it's a manufacturing defect, that is when you want the company to respond and be like, hey, yes, you're within warranty, or maybe you're slightly out of warranty, but we're still going to help you with this. So he's mostly been disappointed just by the lack of communication. I have no idea what's going on there. I haven't tried to be in contact with Screen Innovations ever, certainly not recently, so I have no idea what's going on there. I don't know if perhaps the retailer that you bought it from might be able to have some help. They might have a more open communication line with them. So it's even though don't go expecting your retailer to take care of this for you, right, if you're well outside of the return or exchange window, which you almost certainly are, but just they might, since you are a former customer and you did pay them a lot of money for this screen, they might be willing to try and help you at least get in contact for a warranty claim or something like that. So usually most retailers, if you're patient and approach them kindly and you're not trying to demand any sort of money from them as the retailer, they will try to help you out as far as getting in touch with a manufacturer or something like that. So sure, that's probably the best I can offer there. I mean, I've heard, through the online forums and stuff that there's been some issues with Loon Vision products too, that people haven't been super happy as, more recently, like saying that there's been supply chain issues and some quality control issues that people have faced. So
you can find exactly zero brands. I mean, even SVS.
With zero complaints, exactly. Yeah.
Even SVS has got people out there who's like, SVS didn't help me out.
Like, yeah, that's right. Which we know, what did that person do?
But... Yeah, it's like I'm not saying that you blame the victim here, but it's very hard for me to look at the track record of SVS and think that you didn't play some part in that.
But I don't know about Screen Innovations. I don't know
either.
what their track record is like on that front. So yeah. Very sorry to hear that. That's regardless.
Yeah, it's too bad. Infinite Gary. So we're getting to the questions here. Pretty much all the various streaming sticks and boxes have had new models announced or released recently. Doesn't seem like there are any gigantic changes, but of course they all mention having newer, faster processors than the outgoing models. He might be interested in the forthcoming Apple TV, even though that's still just a rumor at this point. But he's curious, do the faster processors actually help to improve either the image or the sound quality at all? I wouldn't think so. I would think that it would have more to do with switching between apps and, making certain things happen faster, but not necessarily.
Yeah, faster, smoother interface. On the gaming side, certainly, because, of course, like Apple TVs do play games. So on the gaming side, you'd notice the processor boost there. But it's a little bit of a yes and no answer when it comes to video and audio because, let's say the codecs remain the same as they are today, and all you want to do is properly decode and output the stream. Well, then, having a faster processor in there isn't going to make any difference versus what you have today, if it's the same codecs that we're using today. But we know there's new codecs coming, right? We got AV1 that's picking up steam. There's going to be, whatever replaces H.265 with H.266. So with those coming up, nothing about those, if you have a fairly recent streaming device, they probably can be updated to support that, but not always. And something like AV1, we're definitely seeing built into the chips that they just, decode it inherently on a hardware level. So when it comes to new codec support, that's an area where the improved processors can definitely have an impact there. And then there's also the cases like the NVIDIA Shield where they have optional processing that can be done on the streaming box itself. So if we're talking
NVIDIA
about...
Shield is basically a computer. I mean, it's way more powerful than your
Chromecast. It's like a
cast.
phone, really. It's
Yeah,
like a phone built into a streaming box. So, on something like that where it's doing AI upscaling, machine learning, edge enhancements, and those types of things, then you might be able to see a difference there. So, yeah, I would say it's a yes and no. If we're talking about just straight decoding and outputting what the stream originally sent, and it's using current codecs that are already in use today, then no. Zero difference there. But yeah, it'll be the other enhancements, new codec support, and then any optional processing that you might choose to activate where you might see a difference that way.
So we just mentioned the new energy regulation changes planned in the EU that will impact TVs. Obviously, any such laws wouldn't apply to the USA. Nevertheless, Gary wants to ask if we think this might have any impact on product availability in North America. I mean, I don't think so. I think the only thing they're going to do is maybe put some sort of setting that's specific to the EU in the current TVs. I mean, I don't see any reason for them to say, oh, well, then we're no longer making TVs for the United States. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So
yeah, no, I mean, I'm obviously I don't blame Gary for seeing the oodles of headlines that were out there saying 8K TVs will be banned in the EU. Is this the end of 8K TVs? All the other clickbait headlines that, unfortunately, even places that I really respect were using those headlines to, I guess, get the clicks. Yeah, I mean, all of that, like we detailed in the news story earlier in the podcast. This isn't going to stop 8K TVs, even in the EU. Definitely not in North America. The manufacturers are not going to stop that. They're just going to put them into a lower power consumption mode by default so that they can meet the regulations. Whether they choose to do that in North America as well, just because it's easier to do the same thing everywhere, I don't know about that. But as far as products actually being available, no, nothing's going to change there.
Yeah. Shawn and his wife have a 65-inch LG C8 OLED at the moment. They'd like to rearrange the layout of their living room, but do so would mean they'd end up sitting farther away from the TV, probably about 11 feet. And if that is the case, 65 inches is going to be too small, and
I agree.
Way too small. That way came from me. They're trying to stay under $3,000. He already knows they love the picture quality of their OLED, but they probably have to go with the 77-inch size to stay within their budget. Meanwhile, the 85-inch Samsung QN90 QLED could be had, so he'd like our take on whether it would be a mistake to switch to an LCD TV in order to get the larger size. This is a living room, so it isn't fully light controlled, but he feels they might be spoiled now by their OLED's perfect black levels. So what do we say he should get? I should not rearrange your living room. Is that an option? Can we not? Can we not do this?
It sounds like the living room is getting rearranged, and it sounds like he's kind of not against the idea of getting a new, larger TV anyway. But yeah, just to throw a couple of things out there first, just so everyone understands, like the screen size changes. He's saying they'll probably be about 11 feet from eyes to screen. So if you went up to the 77-inch screen size, that would be the same field of view. So 77-inch screen from 11 feet away. That'll give you a 28.5 degree field of view, which is definitely on the small side. It's actually below SEMPT's recommendations for even just HD TV, let alone 4K TV, although you're getting pretty close because the recommendation there is a 30 degree field of view. But that would be the same as viewing your current 65-inch TV from 9 feet 3 inches away. So about 9.5 feet versus 11 feet when you go from 65 inches to 77 inches. Whereas the 85-inch screen size that you could get with the QN90 series, either the QN90A from last year or the QN90B from this year, Samsung's flagship 4K QLED TV. That'll give you a 31.2 degree field of view from 11 feet away. It doesn't sound like a whole lot more, but at least you're over SEMPT's recommendation there. And that's the same field of view as viewing your 65-inch TV from 8.5 feet away. So, basically you're... it's like sitting a foot closer to your 65-inch TV to watching that 85-inch from 11 feet away versus the 77-inch. So, of course, we often talk about your TV does not have to be mounted on the wall. You could put it on a stand, which brings the TV a bit closer to you without it looking strange. We're pretty used to seeing a TV stand in our room, so that is an option to get it even a little bit closer. But I'm not sure exactly how far he's sitting from his 65-inch right now, but hopefully that gives you a ballpark idea of what you would be giving up going to the 77-inch size instead of the 85.
Right. So are you done?
The recommendations are right there. Like, one thing I would say is we're not that far away from Black Friday. There are still quite a few C1 OLEDs available. Right? So that's from last year. That's from 2021, and there's still quite a bit of stock of LG's C1 OLEDs. They haven't started really selling out yet. They got down to $3,700. He wants to keep it around $3,000. I don't know if the I'm talking about the 83-inch size here for right. $3,700. So I'm not sure if that will come all the way down to $3,000. I'm thinking maybe $3,200 though isn't out of the question. If they've still got stock of C1s on Black Friday in the 83-inch size, I don't think $3,200 is out of the question. Another $500 off from where they are. So, is that close enough that you can stay with OLED? You can get the 83-inch screen size. I do agree, from 11 feet away, you want to go as big as you possibly can. Even with the TV on a stand, if you're 10 feet from eyes to screen, you still kind of want to go as big as you can when 85 is the biggest that you might be getting. So I'll just say that, since we're not that far away from Black Friday, maybe keep an eye on those 83-inch C1s. However, we know for certain the QN90As from last year, Samsung's QLEDs, are at $2,600 right now, definitely under your budget. And even the QN90B from this year is at $3,000 right now. So those are definitely, that's the 85-inch size I'm talking about. So, honestly, those QN90 series QLEDs from Samsung, I've often said they're about as close to OLED performance as LCDs get. They've got the full array local dimming, they've got the quantum dots, they are very, very bright. They're actually brighter than OLEDs in peak brightness. However, they don't retain the exact same completely inky black levels. Myself, even in a lit room, I still prefer the way black looks on an OLED, because people are like, oh, do you need the deepest black levels if you're in a lit room? Well, you have whatever light hits the screen. The Samsungs are excellent at mitigating clear mirror-like reflections, and they're excellent at mitigating glare. But the black level in general still rises just a little bit whenever there's light in the room. They don't, just like the TV isn't even powered on. You look at the screen and it's a little bit dark gray, whereas the OLEDs stay inky black under all conditions. At least the LG-based OLEDs do. So even in a lit room, I still prefer the black level performance of an OLED myself. That's why I'm kind of like, let's see where those 83-inch C1s get on Black Friday. So if possible, I still lean towards a C1, but in this scenario, I think the size is more important. And I don't think in a living room setting, you'd be terribly disappointed going to the Samsung QN90. Like I said, I think it's about as close to OLED as LCDs get. They are really, really good looking TVs. So if you no longer have your OLED elsewhere in the house to compare it on a regular basis, then I don't think you're going to be disappointed by that. And I think the size matters more. So that's my ultimate take on that.
Lastly, he asked, do the apps that are built into either the LG OLED or the Samsung QLED deliver the same audio quality via ARC or eARC that you would get from an Apple TV 4K? Well, ARC does not do lossless.
ARC wouldn't,
yeah.
Although when we're talking about the streaming services,
it's all going to be lossy anyways.
Yeah, most do support outputting Atmos in the form of Dolby Digital Plus. Now, that isn't 100% across regular ARC in either TVs or receivers. Now, both of these TVs, the LG OLEDs or the Samsung QLEDs, they will, from regular ARC, be able to output the Dolby Digital Plus version of Dolby Atmos. So it isn't a problem on the TV side. I don't know what receiver he's using, so if the receiver does not have eARC, if the receiver is old enough that it has regular ARC, not all of those supported the Dolby Digital Plus version of Atmos over regular ARC. Now, if your AV receiver has eARC, enhanced audio return channel, you're fine on that front. You will definitely be able to get Dolby Atmos from all of your streaming services if you have eARC. Now, will the built-in apps be equal to the audio quality coming from an Apple TV 4K? So it won't be identical, because what the Apple TV 4K does is decode all the audio itself, and then it outputs the audio as PCM. So you won't have a literal identical thing show up on the front panel display of your AV receiver. But from the streaming services themselves, if it's Atmos, it's Dolby Digital Plus. None of them are using lossless. So in that sense, the same thing is available from the streaming side. But what I have to caution is it's sort of an app-by-app thing.
Right.
Because on the built-in apps on the TVs, even though the service itself is capable of sending it and the hardware of the TV is capable of supporting it, not all of the apps offer the highest quality codec support. It's an app-by-app thing. Now, that's true of the Apple TV 4K as well, right? Because like the Plex app that's available on the Apple TV 4K doesn't have the same audio support as an NVIDIA Shield or an Xbox Series X has, as far as Plex goes. If you're watching YouTube, the Apple TV 4K doesn't support the best quality that's available from YouTube. It doesn't have the Roku channel, so I mean, there's specific reasons for specific apps that you might still want a different streaming solution. So unfortunately, there's no blanket answer.
Yeah.
But in terms of what does the TV hardware support, what is it capable of doing, and what's coming from the streaming services themselves, the generalized answer is yes, you can get the same quality. Like if we're talking, I want to be able to get Dolby Atmos from streaming, yes, you can in terms of what the hardware is capable of. I can't guarantee from each specific app you will actually get it.
Right, and that's almost always the case. The research you need to do, first of all, if the choice is any standalone streaming device and using the internal apps of my TV, I will choose 100 out of 100 times the standalone streaming box, just because of the absolute can of worms that you open yourself up to when you start trying to use ARC or eARC.
Yeah.
But if it's really important to you to know, which one you should go with, it's important to just go through app by app what you actually use. If you know, don't worry about the hardware, don't worry about what it supports, what it doesn't support. You only care about the apps you actually use. Do you use YouTube? And if you do you care about 5.1?
Yeah, like the weird thing is, the YouTube app that's built into the LG OLEDs, it's better than the Apple TV YouTube app.
Yeah.
So,
So
the
that
thing is, you're gonna have the TV for sure. So if it's a case like that, and you care about the utmost quality, well, then you'll be able to use the TV's built-in app for the specific apps where it happens to be better, and you'll be able to use the Apple TV for the apps where it's better. So it's not usually a downside to have both. The other thing I'll mention is, of course, the Apple TV 4K remains my favorite external streaming box because it has the best frame rate switching support still. Even though, yes, the Chromecast with Google TV just got an update, and the NVIDIA Shield is still working on their frame rate switching support. As far as actually working across the greatest number of apps in an actual correct and reliable way, the Apple TV 4K still has the best frame rate switching support. And the built-in apps on the TVs really don't do that. They just do everything 60 hertz. So if you want 24 frames per second and judder free, Apple TV 4K is your best bet there.
Keshaun has a 7.1.4 channel setup, so his question here about Atmos is purely out of curiosity. He asks, if you do an Atmos setup with only 2 overhead speakers, why are they always a left and right pair? Why isn't there an option for a single top front and a single top rear? We've also said, okay, wait a second. So I guess there's more to this. Sorry, there was the picture. We've often said that if you're going to do Atmos, it's best to have 4 overhead speakers because otherwise you don't get any front to back panning. But you could if there were a single option for an option for a single top front with a single top rear. And he's thinking for the side to side panning effects, what if some amount of the overhead surrounds were matrix into the front left and right and surround back left and right speakers? Do we agree with his line of thinking that 2 overhead speaker setup would actually deliver more pleasing steering and effects this way? I agree that when we initially talked about Atmos, and I made the erroneous assumption that you would be able to put your speakers wherever the heck you wanted, and Atmos would just say, okay, now I know where they are, and I will do what I can to steer stuff around, that would have been the best solution for Atmos or DTSX or 3D for that matter. But they didn't do that. They still insist that you put your speakers in specific places. And I'll 1,000% guarantee you it is because of processing power. It is so much easier for them to do all this with knowing exactly where the speakers are supposed to be rather than them figuring it out either or you putting it in manually. This is a case where people can barely put speakers where they're supposed to be to begin with. They and even when they can, they agonize. They don't agonize over feet or dozens of degrees. They agonize over inches. And whether or not it's exactly the 5 degrees or 25 degrees or whatever. They agonize over that. So giving them more options, it's just going to be a thing. So I mean, what you're kind of saying here almost is I don't.
I think it's an interesting idea. It is obviously it's a bit of a moot point because there are no AV receivers that offer this as an option. But it's just the hypothetical, right? He's thinking it through. He's like, okay, if you're limited to 2 speakers above you, okay, obviously. We do want 4. That's what he did. That gives you left to right panning and it gives you front to back panning. So he agrees with that. It's not that. It's just that some people are stopping at 7 speakers. And if you only have 2 overhead, is it more important to be able to move sounds side to side, or is it more important to be able to move sounds front to back? And he's like, well, if you can move them front to back, then you could also theoretically matrix some of that sound into your existing floor level speakers and get the left to right panning that way while still having the overhead effect. I mean, look, obviously it's a compromise either way that you do it, right? Because you could say the same thing about the 2 overhead speakers on the left and the right above you, that if you want front to back motion, then matrix some of the sound into the front and rear speakers and you get the effect that way. we tend to say, yes, we're going to focus on left and right speakers because our ears are on the left and right sides of our heads, and we're better at stereo locating things moving side to side than we are stereo locating anything moving front to back or down to up. We're pretty bad at locating sounds that way. We're pretty good at locating sounds moving left to right, just because of the physical placement of our ears. So I think that probably played into it a bit. I also think they were definitely looking at, well, what might people already have in their homes? People might already have a pair of speakers installed in their ceiling for whole house audio or something like that.
Or
and if
for
that was the
one
case,
of those setups where they had the entire 5.0 installed in the ceiling.
That's
then
right.
You could just take all but one of those speakers and use them.
That's right. They already had in-ceiling surround speakers. Well, we're gonna be able to reutilize those that are already installed. Whereas I don't see too many rooms where someone has installed a speaker, directly in front of them in the ceiling and directly behind them in the ceiling. So I think there was probably a little bit of that process going on there. So, I mean, it's not that I think it's an interesting idea. It's not that I disagree, but I also just come back to either way, it's going to be a compromise. And there isn't, like, the way that it works now, we have these two layers that are essentially separated. If you have overhead speakers and you've configured your AV receiver or processor that way, the way Atmos is working at home is that, any of the sounds that are in the overhead layer only get played from the overhead speakers. We envisioned that it was going to be like using all the speakers, including the floor level, to try and give you the best, matrix positioning that could be done. Maybe the processing continues to advance and they make some changes to the Dolby Atmos and the DTS:X renderer future, and it starts doing a bit more of that. But as it stands today, it's just sort of separated. So we are making this choice. Do we want the overhead sounds to be able to move left and right only, or do we want them to be able to move front and back only? I have to think that if I'm watching a movie and I'm paying attention to an overhead sound effect, I am probably going to want to notice that it's able to move left to right a bit more. There's probably more times where it's doing that versus strictly front to back. I agree. If we were able to matrix things into the floor level speakers in either scenario, it would be better and probably a bit moot at that point. It probably wouldn't really matter which one you did if we were matrixing between overhead and floor level. But as it stands, I don't think they did wrong. And like Tom says, you give people even more options and it's probably just going to lead to more confusion.
And the other thing is, I mean, I just remember many, many years ago, I used to use the opening of the Clone Wars as as sort of a demo for whether how the bass sounded in a movie, because the ship flies overhead and lands and then blows up, right? And it never did I think that ship wasn't overhead. It always sounded overhead, and this was back when I was.
You could do that in 5.1. You didn't even need 7.1. You could do it in 5.1, and it worked.
Did it just fine in 5.1. So as much as many people seem to extol the virtues of Atmos. Most of the time, I'm like, you know what? But how would it have sounded just with 5.1?
Indeed.
Most of the time it would have sounded just fine. So whatever. I mean, I still think Atmos. And in fact, when we went to stay with Clint for the hurricane, we talked a little bit more about Atmos, and he's like, "You're the sole reason why I don't have Atmos in here." He goes, I have access to my attic, but it'd be a pain in the butt, and I don't want to do it. But if I thought it would make a difference, I would do it. And you keep telling me it won't make a difference. I'm like, it's not going to make a difference, my man. So he doesn't have Atmos in his theater because I'm like, I said, you can do it. Just be prepared to go. Oh yeah, okay. That's something. Scott has a Wadia 861 CD player. It's over 20 years old and built like a tank. It seems to be working perfectly fine. But Scott is updating his system and wonders if a new CD player would be able to offer any better performance and sound quality. What do we say? I say that it will sound exactly the same, and that you should not do it.
Yes, in particular, I did want to look up and see whether this Wadia 861 player is able to output CDs digitally, via an optical toslink connection. In fact, it has 4 different digital outputs. Take your pick. It has every kind that's available. So if you're using the digital output of this CD player, there will be 0 difference going to a new one. But of course, one of the reasons that this player was built like a tank and very expensive, even back then, is that it has DACs built in, of course, as CD players do, but it was also set up to act as a digital to analog preamp if you want to. It actually has digital inputs as well, so that you could plug other sources into this Wadia CD player and then use its built-in DACs instead of whatever other DACs you might want to use. So if you've been using the analog outputs of this CD player, it's not out of the realm of possibility that you might hear a difference, particularly because, again, I was looking up this audio player, and they actually have like at least 4 different presets for different like curves that can be applied, some EQ that can be applied. So certainly if you've been using the analog outputs, definitely if you've been using any of those preset curve options, it's well within the realm of possibility that you would hear a difference if you just bought a new CD player and used the CD player's digital output and we're just getting the information straight off the disc out of the player and then relying on the digital to analog converters that are in your AV receiver or pre-pro to actually handle all of that stuff and handle whatever processing you want to apply at the AV receiver or pre-pro stage of things in the signal chain. So yeah, this is a bit of a tricky one where what we can say for sure is if it's digital coming out of the Wadia player or digital coming out of a new player, zero difference to be had. So don't worry about that. This is really about if you've been using the analog inputs of the Wadia. Now, if you have and you love it, I would hesitate very strongly to suggest changing to a different CD player, because the only thing I would suggest that somebody get these days is an Ultra HD Blu-ray player and output everything digitally. That's all I would ever suggest somebody do as far as playing discs.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that well, I'm sure there's somebody out there that will say that you should buy such and such player that will upconvert your CDs to, higher bit rate, higher, whatever. And I would say that would absolutely make no audible difference in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. So there is no motivation in my mind for you to buy a different player specifically to play CDs. Yeah. If it were me, if this was mine, I would sell that thing in a heartbeat and just use whatever else I'm using, because
I do have to say, if it's working well, there's the crowd out there
who will pay you lots of money. That thing was over $1,000. I don't know how much it was, because I was looking through the Stereophile review, and the 830, which is like the entry level, was $1,000 or something like that, or more.
Exactly.
So this thing's got to be worth some bank.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, if somebody out there is willing to pay you a couple grand for it just because that's the player that they want, and yours is still working.
Yeah.
If somebody's able to do that, well, then you can go and get, the $500 Panasonic Ultra HD Blu-ray player,
and a new receiver.
Yeah. Or heck, you could go get the UB9000. You could get the flagship Panasonic Ultra HD Blu-ray player, and that one has like really fancy DACs built into it. If you still insist on using an analog stereo connection to play back your CDs, it's got a fabulous analog section in the UB9000. You might come out ahead in terms of money and have a player that can play a lot more discs than just CDs. So from that point of view, I don't mind the idea whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like CDs are, I have them, I own them. Yes. They have not taken one out of a case or out of the container that they are in. I mean,
well, yeah, like for me, I want my disc players to basically be transports. I just want them to take what's on the disc and send it out in a digital form. But not everybody feels that way. So there you go. If you're going to do this, I would say go get a Panasonic UB9000 and sell your Wadia for a profit. That would be the way to do it.
Lots of profit, probably. Mark is considering setting up a couple of near-field subs. From his email, it sounds as though he wants these to augment his existing subs, not replace them, and deliver more tactile punch. He asked, would there be much benefit to getting subs with 2 smaller drivers arranged vertically rather than a shorter sub with a single larger driver for this near field sub idea? Boy, I couldn't be less on board with this, to be honest.
Yeah, I kind of hate all of this.
Yeah. This is a monstrous waste of money in my mind. If you are looking for, so the idea of the near field subs is that they provide that tactile, whatever, that tactile base, which I have talked about in AV Gadgets before, where it exists. It's in that 60 to 100 hertz range, and then you have your normal subs placed optimally around the room wherever they're supposed to be. for your room, and those play below that. So you basically have what sometimes used to be called a mid-bass module that goes, HS used to sell them, that goes between your subwoofers and your speakers, essentially. That sort of 60 to 100 hertz range is where these mid-bass modules will say. This is pointless in my mind.
I mean, it's largely fallen out of favor. Yeah, because if you
they're impossible to integrate together for the most part. Not impossible. They're very difficult to integrate. What you want, my friend, is tactile transducers. You want to add those.
This is the scenario where those totally make sense. Where you're just like, hey, you know what? My bass extension, that's not the problem, but I just want to feel more kick. Now, solution A is whatever EQ you have, whether you have EQ that's built into the subwoofers you already own, or if you have anything in your AV receiver or pre-pro that lets you apply your own manual target curve in any form, including even maybe just the very basic graphic EQ that might be built into your AV receiver. If your current subs that you have are perfectly fine in extension in your room, but you just want more kick you in the chest tactile thump, then give yourself a hump in your target response using an EQ, like I say, EQ anywhere, in the, like, you could do it sort of like across 50 to 80 hertz or something like that would work really well. You can put a hump right around 60, 65 hertz. That's sort of the peak. And then you can have, just put in an EQ hump. And that is almost certainly going to give you that kick you in the chest thing you want without having to buy anything. But if you're saying, well, I've tried that already maybe, and while I got the more tactile bass, I also heard it, and I didn't like the result. I want it to sound linear, but I want to feel more. Well, that's where the tactile transducer would absolutely be the solution. And I will point you at the Butt Kicker brand, and specifically the full-size Butt Kicker LFE. I don't personally feel that any other model is worth your time, but the full-size Butt Kicker LFE, I find quite pleasing. If I were ever going to do a tactile transducer, that would
now you get to buy a new receiver that has the 4 subwoofer outputs, and one of them can be used for tactile transducers.
Specifically for the tactile transducer.
I actually think that that's more cost effective than trying to get a mini DSP and do the reverse thingy that you got to do.
Certainly if you were thinking of upgrading your AV receiver anyway, that is a kind of compelling reason.
He's talking about buying two subwoofers and worried about the number and orientation of the drivers. It's got to be cheaper to buy the receiver and the butt kickers. It's gotta be. So I mean,
the issue with trying to do the near field sub thing to just give you more tactile response in the kick you in the chest area is if you leave your current subwoofers the way that they are, then you just try to add these in, but just over a limited frequency range. Well, now in that frequency range, you've messed up the waves in your room by putting in these things in a different location. You're going to have to rather complicated, go through it all to try and get that back to uniform and linear, which isn't the simplest thing. It's tedious and it's a lot of trial and error. Or you do the mid-bass module setup where you're essentially putting in a new crossover between the near-field subs and your current subs playing only below that. That's not the end of the world, but also the near-field subs will be playing the higher frequencies where if there is any chance of localizing them, it's going to be at the 80 hertz range. It's not going to be at the 40 hertz and below range. So we've never really been on board with the mid-bass module idea. So yeah, this isn't one where I would do either of these things. I mean, I guess to maybe answer the question, directly as it is, are 2 smaller drivers arranged vertically going to make any difference versus one larger driver? I mean, no, that's not going to make any difference whatsoever. So whatever form factor happens to fit best, just to answer the question as wrote. But yeah, we're going to say, I don't think you need to spend anything. I bet you can do this week with EQ, but if you're going to spend something, then spend it on a tactile transducer.
Yeah. And then what was the actual question? 2 smaller drivers arranged vertically. You're not going to be able to find this specific sub.
Well, Rhythmic has that. They have
a
dual 8-inch arranged vertically, so and you can set it up as a mid-bass module with a high pass.
He had something in mind. Okay,
I think so.
Whatever, don't do it, Stefan. If you have a budget that goes as high as $6,000 for an AV receiver or pre-pro, what would be our top recommendation and our reasons for that particular model? He's considering self-powered speakers, so the amplification side of things might be handled that way. So I don't think you need to spend this much money. I mean, the processor.
The reason he would is if he wants to go to a 15 speaker setup, which I don't know if he does. Now you're in the range where you can definitely entertain that. You can have a 9.1.6 channel type of setup in this budget range. We're always going to say, because the performance is the same, and certainly at this price point, the AV receivers all have a full set of pre-outs, and if you, let's say you get a mix of self-powered and passive speakers, maybe your surround backs and your overheads are passive, but your, front and surround speakers are active or something like that, well, you're going to have amplifiers built in to the AV receiver. And just because of, economies of scale, the AV receiver version pretty much always costs less. Even though it has amplifiers built in, it almost always costs less. So we're going to say go with the AV receiver version. Now, one that comes to mind right away is Monoprice's HTP1. It's actually going to be the least expensive as of today of all the ones I'm going to mention. It can do 9.1.6. It is a dedicated pre-pro. It doesn't have any amplifiers built in. And right now the price is $4,000, but it's out of stock. And we don't actually know if it's going to come at Christmas, which is the ETA they're continuing to list on Monoprice's website. But the other thing about the HTP1 is it still doesn't have HDMI 2.1 switching yet. They've been saying it's going to get it. We're almost sort of assuming that when it does finally come back into stock, that it'll be a new 8K version, but almost certainly at a higher price if it is. So I mentioned that one. I still like it very much. One of the things I like most about Monoprice's HTP1 is that it has Dirac Live for the room correction. You can optionally pay extra to add Dirac Live bass management. They already have it. They're not waiting until 2024. But Monoprice has created their own curves of equal loudness outside of Dirac. So that's a unit where you can have Dirac and curves of equal loudness. Similar thing to Odyssey's dynamic EQ or YPOW's YPOW volume. So I like that feature set. It's just that they don't have HDMI 2.1 and you can't actually get one right now. They're just out of stock. Now, if we're talking about AV receivers, like I was just mentioning, feature set wise, I do really have to love Denon's new AVR A1H. Now, it's actually $500 in terms of MSRP over your budget. It's $6,500. But the pre-pro version of it over at Marantz is $7,000. So, you're paying even more and not getting 15 amplifiers that are built inside of Denon's A1H. And the processing is identical, and you still have 15 speaker pre-outs and 4 independent subwoofer pre-outs. So that's kind of the thing that Denon and Marantz are offering that nobody else is offering, are the 4 independent subwoofer outputs. But as we just mentioned, yes, Dirac Live is supposed to be supported, not until 2023. Bass management isn't going to be supported until 2024. So you're giving up on the Dirac side of things, but it comes with Odyssey. So we're fine in terms of what it already comes with, and we know for sure that it's going to have. There are alternatives. Anthem, they have their MRX 1140. It goes for $4,200, and that does have HDMI 2.1 now. That's the MRX 1140 8K. They've updated that. Costs $200 more than the original version did, but you get the HDMI 2.1 switching. So that supports 15 speakers and a dual independent subwoofer outputs on that one. It's a 15.2. It actually has 7 amplifiers only that are built into it, but if you're wanting to do a mix of self-powered speakers and maybe your surround backs and overheads are powered by the AV receiver, that's a pretty good option to go there with that MRX 1140. You, of course, be using Anthem's Arc Genesis for the room correction, but that's a darn good program. So I don't really feel you're giving up anything there, although they don't have curves of equal loudness. That's sort of the one thing that I don't like about there. But $4,200, pretty reasonable price. And then Arcam, they've got some interesting things going on there at pretty reasonable prices. So definitely there's no feature reason whatsoever to go for the flagship receiver in Arcam's lineup, the AVR 31. The AVR 21, which is almost $2,000 less. It's $4,700 for the Arcam AVR 21, but it's well over $6,000 for the AVR 31. And all they did was change the type of amplifiers inside. The feature set is exactly the same, does 15.1. So yeah, that all of those are in the price range. Now, if you're not doing 9.1.6, you can save a whole bunch of money, but given the price range you were talking about, those are the ones I'd be looking at. Myself, I'd maybe try to find a way to that. I mean, it's odd for Denon and Marantz to be the most expensive out of here, but I kind of like having those 4 subwoofer outputs, and I like having curves of equal loudness. I really like having curves of equal loudness.
Yeah. So this would be an example of, at least in my mind, of you're talking about spending money to get the bleeding edge of technology that we have right now, which is the 6 overhead speakers. And
I mean, this is as future-proof as you can get.
That is true, but you are a year or two away from those prices coming significantly down as they start to fold those 6 overhead speakers into lower priced AV receivers.
And as we saw in Denon and Marantz's lineup, they're starting to offer the option of, in the 11, the models that can process 11, the option of going 5.1.6 instead of the only option being 7.1.4. So we're seeing that happen too. I mean, honestly, like the prices on the R cams, those are lower than I would have expected, but we're still talking $4,700, you know, so it's not cheap by any means, but more affordable certainly than 16-channel processors used to be.
And again, you're spending thousands of dollars more to get 2 more overhead speakers that
and front wides, Tom, and front wides. But yeah, one of the reasons that I do still like the Denon Marantz, I don't actually know for certain when it comes to the RCam or the Anthem whether they have the version of the Dolby Surround up mixer that puts sounds into the front wides. We know for certain the Denon and Marantz ones do. They got the updated version Dolby Surround up mixer that does utilize front wide speakers, because originally the Dolby Surround up mixer would never utilize front wide speakers at all. And if you're going for the 9.1.6, you want your front wides to do something. So I'm not saying that the RCam and the Anthem do not. The Monoprice HTP1 also does for sure put sounds into the front wides. But I'm not certain that the Anthem and the RCam do. So I haven't been able to use those personally to confirm the Dolby Surround up mixer and those actually utilizes front wides. So anyway, my top choice out of this would be the Denon A1H. It's the most expensive, but it's still less expensive than the pre-pro version.
Okay. The speakers you might be considering are the Seaton Catalyst 12C self-powered stand mount speakers. They use dual 12-inch woofers with a coaxial 8-inch mid-range and 1-inch titanium tweeter. They are
that is too big of a mid-range driver.
Yeah, they are internally tri-amplified using ICE amps, and they go for around $4,000 each. Do we have any thoughts on those? Well, Rob doesn't like the mid-range. Do we have any thoughts on those? And he's got a budget as high as $5,000 for each speaker. What would be our choice? One thing he isn't sure about with the Setons is what he would use as surrounds. So he wouldn't necessarily be using self-powered speakers in all positions. Again, another reason to get an AV receiver.
Yeah, exactly.
I am against, in general, self-powered speakers. And I understand the motivation. I understand the thought process behind it. And for those of you that are wondering what I think those are, you know, here you get perfectly matched by the manufacturer amplifiers for each driver or each speaker that are tuned and calibrated and everything else, so that, you know, the impedance dips are all known and accounted for, and the amplifiers themselves can be EQ'd in such a way to make sure that you get as good a response as the manufacturer ever wanted to get. The perfect matching of the amount, in theory, of the amount of power that they can put out versus how loud these things can get. You don't have to ever worry about anything else. You just plug them in and they're ready to go. And for me, at least, with a self-powered speaker, you are just, you know, you're paying a lot of extra money for, and at least in this case, where they're tri-amplified with ICE amplifiers, where you're paying a lot of extra money for a full package deal. Whereas if one little part of it breaks, you're completely, the whole thing has to be tossed out. You know, you are out of luck. Like if your AV receiver loses a channel, you get a new AV receiver. You don't have to replace your speakers. That's what happens here. You're completely out of a speaker, or you have to send it in for repair, probably in a very expensive repair. I mean, if you're really on board with having self-powered speakers for whatever reason, that's fine. I'm not going to tell you can't do it. I just don't love the idea of having all those eggs in that one basket. And I don't necessarily think that you need to have perfectly matched amplifiers for your speakers when we have room correction and we have, external amplification and all sorts of other options for how you can match your speakers with a really good, very flat amplifier.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, for me, like, I mean, I haven't heard these speakers. They probably sound really, really good. They're probably high efficiency and super high output. But yeah, like an 8-inch mid-range driver acting as the horn for your tweeter, like, unless they've done some really funky stuff with the crossover, that's just like usually a little bit problematic to use a driver that large as your mid-range trying to play up to the crossover of the tweeter. That almost always like coaxial drivers as they are have intermodulation distortion problems that you have to overcome. Kef and Andrew Jones, they're really good experts at doing specifically that, but once you make it even more challenging by using a mid-range driver that's physically too large, unless that tweeter is playing remarkably low for a 1-inch titanium tweeter, unless they're doing some really funky stuff with crossover. Maybe that's why they cost as much as they do. Maybe they're using digital crossover that allow them to put in essentially brick wall filters. So I'm not saying there aren't ways to engineer around this, but that's just, to me, a bit of an odd choice. It's also unnecessary for a mid-range driver to be that large, even to play really, really loud. It doesn't have to be that big, so I find that an odd choice. But in this price range, I'd be looking at per listen. You wouldn't be able to get the largest per listen speakers for this, but you can get the ones that I like best, which are the really big bookshelves, S5, either the S5M for the vertical or the S5C for the horizontal version. Now you're getting THX Dominus certification if you want to feel that way, but you're getting the really excellent beryllium drivers for the high end. These are exceedingly high power handling, high output. THX Dominus certification, so exceedingly high output, which I think is a thing he was looking for, given the Seaton speakers that he was looking at.
Right.
Those would be the speakers I would look at. I'd go look at per listen.
So you're strongly considering either an in-wall or on-wall surrounds. Is one better than the other in terms of performance? And do we have a recommendation? Not for your Seatons. I don't know anything about how flat they measure or anything else, and that's part of the problem here. I mean, we recommend lots of in-wall versus on-wall speakers that you can find our recommendations for.
I mean, I can sort of truncate all of this if you take my per listen recommendation, because per listen has in-wall speakers that they've just introduced, but they are fully sealed with integrated cabinets that are thin enough to fit within the bays of a wall, but you can also they are developing, just simple frames that can go around it to turn them into on-walls, exactly the same way that Focal does things with their fully sealed in-wall models and up in their high-end lineup. So again, if you're sticking with per listen all the way around, and here is one where you could save some money because you could definitely go down to the less expensive R series when it comes to your surrounds and your surround backs and your overhead speakers. There's no reason to stay with the super expensive S series. And now you have the option. You can do them as on walls, you can do them as in walls, because they got the fully sealed integrated enclosures, which I really, really like for in-wall speakers. I love a speaker that's designed with an integrated back box that you don't have to get separately. So I love that per listen did that. And now you got per listen all the way around. Is it better to use, inherently to use in-wall surrounds versus on-wall surrounds? No, not really.
Yeah.
I just generally, for most people, I'll normally suggest the on-wall simply because it gives you more placement options and it gives you the at least ability. It might be a hassle, but at least the ability to move the speaker after the fact, whereas the in-wall is a much bigger hassle to move if you ever have to, of course. But yeah, I think per listen might be what you're looking for here.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. There is no inherent sonic difference or sonic benefit to going in versus on wall. A well-designed speaker for in wall versus a well-designed speaker for on wall can both sound remarkably good.
Yeah.
If you're looking for another option here, I guess if I was looking for on wall, I would look at was it Legend? Is that them? Is that who I'm thinking of?
Oh,
no, Legacy.
Yeah, Legacy could be one here. Yeah, you're right about that.
You know, if you're gonna stick with their Setons, I mean, Legacy makes great speakers. We know that, and they measure fairly well. So I don't know how they would pair necessarily with your with the Seton idea, but they're surround speakers anyways. They can just be close. So the Legacy Audio might be an option for you to look at. He says, have we heard of Basso Bass and their Raptor cylinder subs at all? They use dual 15-inch drivers with them mounted on top and bottom in the cylinder enclosure with external amplification. They go for $2,600 each or $4,600 for duals with a single shared external amp. Any thoughts on those? I'm sure they are very loud. They look like garbage cans.
Sure.
They look exactly like garbage cans.
I just feel badly about the company right off the bat because they decided to use Comic Sans on their website for a bunch of the typeface, and I'm just like, you used Comic Sans on your website.
They have a lot of different fonts on here. Let's give them.
They have a lot.
Let's just be honest here. Like the BassoBass.com logo at the top is illegible.
Right.
Basically.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not impressed by their website. They have no measurements posted. The specs you have to search to find. You can find some basic specs, but they don't even list like a very normal extension and maximum output type of spec thing. I guess you can glean those from they talk about exactly what components they use, so I guess you can figure it out on your own. But overall, I'm not impressed by the website at all, so that made a bad impression on me. Now, is there anything about the design of the subwoofers that wouldn't be able to work? No. I mean, these are sealed cylindrical cabinets that look pretty overbuilt, and they put in two 15-inch very capable drivers, and then all the external amplifiers that they sell themselves are sold out, so I guess you're going elsewhere to get something to power these things. But at the price point that they're charging, I'm not seeing why you need to go here to do this. You can go to Power Sound Audio and get something that we know works really well. You can even go to SVS at these price points and get a PB16 Ultra. So
I'm wondering how big this room is he's going for, and I'm afraid that he's. I mean, I don't like I said.
I mean, this is all AVS Forum stuff. That's all AVS Forum stuff. That's clearly where he's been led to all of these things, and they must be better because they're not utilized by everybody out there, right? They're not the mainstream, Tom. They're not the mainstream. That means they must be better.
And we hear that just an awful lot around here. Like SVS was all the rage when it was relatively unknown, and now SVS is sort of hit. You know, that you get them at Best Buy and everything else. Now, SVS. I mean, my dad has one of those. They can't be any good.
I mean, going over all of this stuff, like in the price points that he's been talking about, and it seems like maybe he just wants to go crazy, crazy loud. Another brand that we should mention is JTR.
Right.
And you know what? AVS Forum loves JTR, man.
There you go.
They love them. So definitely I would be more on board with all of this stuff, the subwoofers and the speaker, going with JTR. Power Sound Audio too. Yeah. But if you want even more out of the beaten path, then JTR is one that like only Forum people know about. And if you want loud, then JTR, they'll get loud.
If your room is not super massive and your scene distances aren't like ridiculously large, why are you spending all this extra money to get all this extra output?
I think he just
I'm looking at the amplifiers they're pairing with these subwoofers here, and I'm like, those have fans. I mean, you can tell that
they're pro amps, there's no question about that.
So I mean, are you going to put the amp in the same room as you? Because if you are, that right there kills it. That right there kills it. Are you going to sit there and have the fan blowing the entire time? Have you even considered that? I mean, is it going to be in a different room? I don't know. Maybe it is, but I would. My first question to you is why? Mm-hmm. Why is this the gear you're looking at? And yes, sure, AVS Forum, whatever. This is what you've heard, and you want something unique, and that's fine. Like, I don't mind. Like, I want to have gear that nobody's heard of.
Not many people have for listen yet.
Yeah. I want to have gear nobody's ever heard of. That's great. Right. I can get behind that. But why? Why spend all this money on stuff that is so
It's 2022,
loud?
And you create a new, or I don't know how new Basso Bass is, but you create a subwoofer company with no measurements, very little specs, and Comic Sans.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Bad.
Rafael really appreciated our room treatment device for his mostly blacked out dedicated theater last week. Oh, this is the one with the DVDs stapled to the wall.
That is the one.
Yeah. We said to focus first on corner bass trapping on his back and his back wall, so that's what he's going to do. All right, well, good. For the corner traps, would a cheap option like the triangular foam corner bass traps that you can buy from Amazon be okay? Or does he need to get GIC tri-traps or something else? You said the word foam, and foam is not very effective.
Do not get the foam triangles. Absolutely not. Yes, as cheap as they are, it's a complete waste of money.
Yeah.
They do nothing. So do not get those.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at, fully made corner bass trap options just in terms of price, then yeah, I mean the tri-traps, what are they? They go for about $150 each, something in that sort of price range. So you can go a little bit less expensive if you go over to Acoustimac. Acoustimac has ones now. They aren't shaped exactly like a triangle, but they have the the sides angled, beveled, so that they'll fit perfectly into a corner. Now you can go, depending on the thickness and the size and the finish that you get, you're looking anywhere between $100 to $185 each in terms of the fully made Acoustimac corner bass traps that are very comparable to what a tri-trap would do from GIC. So it can actually be a little bit more expensive than a tri-trap if you go for the thickest with an upgraded finish, but they can be less expensive and still fit fully flush into a corner just like the tri-traps would. So I'm a big fan of the Acoustimac corner bass traps. However, of course, if this is all about keeping the price as low as possible, one thing I really like from Acoustimac is they have DIY kits that you can purchase for $55 for the 4 foot by 2 foot by 4 inch thick. And if you straddle a corner with that, it's going to work very nice. So you're assembling it yourself, but for $55, you can get the DIY bass trap kit. It doesn't have the beveled sides to go fully flush into the corner, but there's no reason you can't just straddle the corner with one of those. If you want to go even less expensive, you could purchase your own insulation, have your own fabric wrap, because he's talking about maybe getting printed ones as well. So Acoustimac also sells, like, if you just don't want the labor of putting together the frame, they just sell frames as well. So you can get the frame for only $29. So all those DIY options are really, really good if you want to keep the price down going with Acoustimac, but definitely do not get foam.
For his back wall, he will definitely want to go with printed panels like we suggested. Luckily, his son-in-law is an excellent artist, and Rafael would love to put up some of his work, so you won't have to worry about copyright issues going that route. Where do we recommend getting either printed panels or just fabric that would work well? So I did it through GIC. I had GIC make my panels with art that Andrew's wife had done, and he sent me PDFs of it. And then it was just literally drag it onto the frame and then center it up, and then they did it, and it was fine. I wrote an article about it. I'll link it up here. And
what kind of price did you end up with for those?
I don't remember. Mine are 2 feet by 2 feet by 2 inches.
Oh,
so
okay.
They're not.
So they're smaller.
They're
quite
smaller.
A bit smaller.
Yeah, because that's what I have kind of mostly around my room. I have lots of those. But I don't remember. I mean, they might be on there. Hold on a second. Let me look. I'll figure it out.
I mean, so once again, while Tom is looking that up, I will mention Acoustimac again. Like, if you're already getting stuff from them, they also do printed panels. Now, if you're going for like a 2 foot by 4 foot size, or even a 2 foot by 3 foot sort of size, you should figure in the realm of $200 to $250 when we're talking about the fully finished product, and that's each. So the printed panels are not inexpensive.
Yeah.
Again, that's fully finished panels, and I don't think GIC's prices are a million miles away from that.
Mine was 2 feet by 2 feet by 2 inches, and they were $125 per panel.
Okay, right. So if you went 2 foot by 4 foot, then that would obviously cost more. You're going to get pretty close to that $200 range, and ideally we're always going to go as thick as we can. So the price I was saying, like $250 gets you a 4 foot by 2 foot by 4 inch thick from Acoustimac, and I think it's more expensive than that for that size thickness of printed panel from GIC. So we're in that sort of price range. You can probably figure $150 to $250 each, right? It's just sort of budget somewhere in that range. So for that reason, if you wanted to do anything DIY, like that's sort of why I mentioned just getting maybe just the frames from Acoustimax, save yourself, just the trouble of designing and putting and doing any cuts and all that. That just comes with pre-drilled screw holes that you're just going to assemble when you have it at home there. And then you just get bats of insulation that are going to fit in there, and then get your own fabrics. So the couple of places that we always say, and this, now that you're not dealing with copyright issues of trying to do copywritten movie posters like so many people are trying to do, Spoonflower or My Fabric Designs are both places where you can just have them print it on fabric. Costs much less to do it that way and just have the printed fabric shipped to you and you wrap it yourself. Go for either what they call their Silky Fail, Faille is the way that you spell that. So either the Silky Fail fabric or the Performance Knit. The Performance Knit is the one that most people seem to like the best. It has a little bit of stretch to it, but only in one direction, so it's not too bad for doing the wrapping yourself. And yeah, those are pretty reasonably priced if you get just the fabric from there and do DIY panels.
All right. Yeah. Do that. I guess these are the questions for the video processor questions we talked about.
I did some editorializing. Save them to the end like we saved our discussion last week.
All right. Don't mind me. I'm starting to nod off already. How much time we have left? We got a half an hour left. Jonathan and Ilango is kind of who we're summarizing here. We've discussed them before, but Jonathan has just started looking into the Lumagen Radiance and MadVR Envy video processors for himself, since he now has his Sony projector set up. These video processors are expensive, in the $7,000 to $10,000 range, which is actually more than he paid for his model of Sony projector. Which is ludicrous. But of course, owners swear by them. It's because when you sink that much money into something, cognitive dissonance kicks in big time. Reviewers talk about their ability to offer unmatched tone mapping, even for JVC projectors and flat panels with their own frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping, plus consistent aspect ratios, overall better image quality, and extensive calibration controls with 3D LUTs and all that.
Lookup tables.
Whatever. So, could we revisit our thoughts on these outboard video processors for him? What are they really Who are they really marketed for? How many people are really going to spend that kind of money on them? And are they really worth the cost? It's crazy to me that these things still exist, to be honest with you. I
don't feel that way.
Well, it's such a strange product for me, because who benefits the most from getting a video processor is somebody whose projector is fairly capable, but doesn't have the processing power within it to get the picture as good as it can be actually displayed by the projector. Right? So the projector has the ability to display an extremely accurate picture, but it can't do it because when the signal comes in, it doesn't process it properly, or doesn't process it enough, or doesn't, do all the stuff it's supposed to do. And therefore, it comes out slightly worse than it could be. So what are the solutions there? Well, calibrating your projector, getting a professional to do it, usually will take care of most of that. Will for $500. I haven't done a price test on a projector calculator it's somebody coming in and calibrating a projector in a long time. So $500 seems to be a fairly good number just to sort of estimate how much it's going to cost you to have a calibrator come in. Can usually get you most of the way there. That takes that projector that technically could probably do stuff, but the calibration is not that great, and the rest of your gear is not sending it the signal that it can send or that should send in order to make the image as good as it can be. So this takes it a step further and says, I will make sure that every signal that is sent to the projector has to do nothing. Nothing but just put up exactly what it's sent, which is something it can do, because I can make sure that the processor only gives it what it can do and what it can do best. So who benefits most from that? Well, if you've already spent a large amount of money on, like, say you bought a JVC projector because you wanted
the flagship, right? You spent $26,000.
Yeah, I mean, how much better is that projector going to look? Is it 50% better? No. It's not going to be 50% better. Is it 25% better? No, that's not 25% better. Is it 10%
Well,
better? I don't know. I don't think so.
I mean, this word "better" too is problematic,
Right.
because so there's better as in it is closer to a truly accurate representation of the signal, because the video signal, particularly now that we have HDR, is very specific. It is a set of instructions that say show exactly this color at exactly this many nits. There's really no ambiguity when it comes to video signals. This isn't a matter of taste in terms of is this better at accurately showing the signal. But then there's I just think it looks better, which is I like it more, right? And we just use the word I think it's better, but that doesn't necessarily mean more accurate. So yeah, it would be easy for me to say I don't think there's any reason to get these, they're overpriced, blah blah blah, but I don't completely feel that way. And it's certainly the case where if you're just the sort of person who goes, oh, I like the way that looks better and I don't mind paying the price, right? Well, then I don't have any like, it's not as though you're going to get one of these things and not get any performance from it. You're gonna get something and you're probably gonna like it. Most people like it. So like, who is this really marketed for? Primarily folks for whom $7,000 to $10,000 is just nothing. That primarily. Why not? Go ahead and get it, because they're not the person who's gonna spend the time to dig into the idiosyncrasies of whatever projector they have and maybe discover there's one or two things they want to adjust that they can't or something like that. Like they're just going to say go ahead to their installer and their calibrator, put this thing in, because then no matter what projector I buy, all you ever have to do with any projector is put it into its native widest possible color mode. And this is something where like even Samsung's QLEDs can benefit a bit from something like a MadVR or a Lumagen Radiance, where people talk about, yeah, they can benefit even flat panels. The Samsung QLEDs show the least amount of posterization, the least amount of color banding if you put them into their native color mode, which will not be accurate to the signal. But if you leave the TV or the projector in its native color mode as wide as it can possibly be, but then you're able to calibrate the colors in the outboard video processor, well, now you can have the best of both worlds. You can have the widest possible color, the least amount of color banding possible, but still accurate colors as processed by the outboard video processor. There's a reason to maybe do it if you've got a calibrator who's handling everything. You can make sure that the projector is just set to output as bright as it can, not worry about tone mapping, and all of that is going to be handled by the video processor. The calibrator only ever has to learn that unit. They don't have to learn any idiosyncrasies of a new projector that you're bringing in. They're going to be able to do all the calibration in the outboard video processor. So can there be value? There absolutely can. That can save you time, which can save you money when the cost of this is nothing to you, right? It's not something you have to install to get. If these cost $2,000 or less than $2,000, I would start saying to a lot more people, you know what, maybe just go ahead and get one. Because honestly, so much of what we talk about in terms of the capabilities of even just the JVC projectors, really, really capable. I don't really think the JVC projectors need one of these outboard video processors. But to get the JVCs to perform like the way they could perform if you just put the JVC in its native, did nothing to the signal mode, and then did everything in the outboard video processor, to get the JVC there will probably take you more time. You're probably going to have to like dive into it a little bit more. So can it be done with the amount of effort and time put into it? I think it can, but if you're the sort of person who's like, I just don't have the time or I just don't want to do it, if this cost a lot less, then I would say there's the value there. For the enthusiasts who would have to scrimp and save and really not be able to easily afford this, it's really hard to justify. But if you just don't have, like, so Tom's shaking his head. You can't see it on YouTube because he doesn't see the same value. I'm like, I'm trying to.
I don't see how you get $7,000 worth of time out of this thing. I don't see it. I don't see that there's ever gonna. The only people who get this are people who are reviewers or industry people who get it essentially for free. for review, and then
Sure.
it just lives there forever, which happens, and I have no problems with that. And they can love it all they want. They can say it gives them all this power, and they're blah blah blah, and they can think it's the best thing ever. And then it's people who couldn't point it out in a crowd. You couldn't put a stack of electronics in front of them and say, which one is their Lumagen? They would have no clue which one it is, because they didn't pay somebody else to do this for them to have to know anything about it. And the person said, this is the best, and they said, I want the best. Okay, this is what you need to get.
Sure.
Fine, I got it.
But in everything we've said to this point, I've buried the lead, because the thing that everybody notices about these is the HDR processing, the frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping that these outboard video processors. That's going back to what I was saying about this word better, and whether we actually mean accurate to the signal, or if we just mean, I think it looks better, I prefer it. Because from all the comparison shots and all the comparison videos and everything that I've looked at, if you were to put, so this is like the default frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping that the Lumagen Radiance or the MadVR Envy applies, because you can manually change the HDR tone mapping in those things too if you want to dig into it in the outboard video processor. But the default processing that they apply, if you were to actually put like one of the $30,000 mastering monitors beside it, they are they are ironically showing more detail in HDR through the Lumagen Radiance or the MadVR Envy than the signal actually said to. They're retrieving some of the below black and some of the above white information and putting that into their version of the tone mapping by default. Like I say, this isn't something that you can't change to have absolute perfect accuracy, but by default they're showing more, and a lot of people are like, oh, that's better because I'm seeing detail in the shadows and in the highlights that I never saw before. Even on my OLED, even on my 2000 nit QLED, I wasn't seeing those details, and all of a sudden I put the Lumagen or the MadVR in there and I'm seeing these details in HDR that weren't visible before. That's better. But ironically, you put it next to the truly accurate $30,000 mastering monitor and they're showing more detail than they technically should be by default. So that's an interesting conundrum, right? Because a ton of the enthusiasm is coming from that, saying I'm seeing these shadow details that just aren't there any other way. It's only with the Lumagen, it's only with the MadVR. It's not really true. If you have the ability to change some of the gamma or tone mapping settings, you can have that on other displays. You just have to show some of the below black and some of the above white information that technically you're not supposed to see. So there's a bit of trickery going on there, to be perfectly honest. And then a projector can never be 100% accurate to HDR because it just can't show you 1000 nits. It just can't do it. So there's always going to be choices in the tone mapping that are going on there. So yeah, I mean, like I say, if this is just, it doesn't, the cost is super affordable to you and you're more concerned with preference than you are with rock solid accuracy, or even if you're concerned with rock solid accuracy, but you just want to put the time and effort into doing it yourself, like I can find my way to being perfectly okay with you having one of these in your system. I think most people who get them love them. That's evidenced, that people love them, but it's really hard for me to say, well, you got to get one because you just can't get the good image without one. It's not that either. I'm trying to thread the needle down the middle, which is a hard place to be because most people want to be on one end or the other and say they're either useless or they're the only thing.
Oh, no.
And I don't think it's either of them.
Let's be very, very clear here. Let me be very clear here about my opinion. My opinion is not that they're useless at all. That this is definitely a device that does something, and it can.
If they were $1,500, $2,000, I might get one just to have it. You know?
And for a while, there were video processors that were out there that were starting to come down in price like that.
Back in the DVDO days, you know?
They were, and I was on board with getting something like that because you could actually get yourself a cheaper TV.
Yeah.
That
I mean, when the Oppo players had their HDMI inputs and they acted as a video processor, those were a great deal.
So there is a benefit to them, but I understand the pricing because you just aren't going to sell that many units.
Exactly.
You're just not, because and that's why all these other companies are no longer around. Okay,
and the people to whom they're selling most of them, they are in that upper price range where they are spending the $26,000, $30,000 in the projector and another $7,000 or $10,000 to get the best.
Yeah,
these
have a benefit. These do a thing.
Yeah,
and that thing is not a bad thing. And I just cannot fathom telling anybody who would ask the question, should I spend the money on this? Because they, to them, the money means something, that they should spend the money. I'm like, no, just get a better TV or better projector, and you will not miss this. All right. Second, Ilango wanted to know specifically about using the Lumagen Radiance or the MadVR NV with a TV that already has its own frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. What would they offer that the TV cannot already do itself? Do they offer anything that supports the high price? Again, we got to forget the price part of it and the value part of it, because we've already addressed that.
I really addressed pretty much all of that. It's being able to have the best gradation, because you can just put the TV into its native mode and let the video processor do all of that. And then, you can definitely see differences in the HDR, but in terms of which one is actually technically correct, there's a bunch of 4K TVs that you can already get, HDR TVs that you can already get that are really, really accurate to the signal. So it's more about having the ability to manually change that if you want to, and then being able to, by default, have the below black and above white information that you're technically not supposed to see be displayed.
Well, and I think as a general overall, more control means you can dial things in even better. Yeah. And a lot of the dynamic frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping that you get from players or from projectors, it isn't as granular as you might expect.
You get no choice about it. You're stuck with what the manufacturer decided they wanted to do.
So, of course there is value there. It doesn't justify the high price. I mean, not in my mind, but maybe it does to you. Ilango also want to know a bit more about aspect ratio, nonlinear stretch options. Are they just for people using CinemaScope screens? Why do people hate changing aspect ratio so much anyways? Wasn't the director's intent with an artistic decision having been made? And wasn't that the director's intent with an artistic decision having been made and a reason for doing so? Listen, I bought a 2.35:1 screen, and damn it, I'm not going to be convinced that it wasn't a good purchase. Or
I was told this is the shape of movies.
Yes, it's not. That's the crazy thing, is that it is not the shape of movies. 2.35:1 has never been universally the shape of movies. Go
to IMDb, put in a filter for 1.85:1, and you'll see a list of 1,500 really popular movies that are not 2.35:1.
And I have railed against CinemaScope screens for so long, and the reason being is simply because it's so limiting. It's so limiting to have a screen that is just does not fit everything that you might shoot at it. Yes, you can make the argument, well, if you're going to say that, Tom, instead of 16:9, you should be advocating by 4:3 or 1:1,
or just a big square.
Just a big square up there, right? And just fill the entire thing. And I see you're not wrong. You're not wrong. But 16:9 is by far the cheapest and the most universal option. Most things are smaller than 16:9. Height wise,
that's why it was chosen, so that you could mask off. People like, we're just talking general consumers, hate it when their TV, the image doesn't fill their entire TV.
Yeah, they hate
People
it.
hate that. Like when we all had 4:3 TVs and we started getting widescreen DVDs and even widescreen VHS, people always said, why isn't this image filling my whole TV?
That's right. They never understood
and
it.
that has never changed.
Now, the pan and scan days and the letterbox days, the pan and scan days. Oh my God. Having characters on an elevator talking to each other, and the images
was whipping back and forth,
pans back and forth, but and it doesn't. It's not. A lot of times it was automated, right? Like when you got to the pan and scan part, that whatever the transfer was, however the transfer process, it just kind of did it, and there would never be a person on screen talking like that. You would be looking at the person getting the information, or you'd be looking between them. There'd be nobody, or it was just the person who's talking almost never seemed to be on the screen. It was the worst. So yes.
But a lot of the video processing in these, it is for the CinemaScope screens. That's absolutely what it's for. It's for anamorphic lens support. It's for moving subtitles so that they aren't cut off on the bottom. It is for that, because they've we're going right into this with Karl's next question. They've convinced a lot of people that you go with the 2.35 to 1 screen, and Tom and I have always railed against that and said 16 by 9, yes, you will have black bars. We were not going to go away from black bars. 16 by 9 and get the width of 16 by 9 that you want. It might be too tall for a lot of your content, but get the width that you want, but stick with 16 by 9.
So, like Rob said, we got something from Karl here. Karl watched the YouTube video in which John from Barco and MadVR enthusiastically talks about replicating the Dolby Cinema experience at home using Barco and MadVR products, of course, and how he considers it to be the third revolution of home theater. And, by the way, he said the second revolution was convincing lots of people to install CinemaScope aspect ratio screens at home rather than 16 by 9. So you can
just so you know where we're starting
from, right? Whether or not we're going to be on the same page with your boy John. Some choice quotes here. Quote number 1: there is no disadvantage with projectors with an HDR. In fact, reference HDR image is a Dolby Cinema.
So we'll just respond to these as we go, because that is just factually wrong.
Yeah,
now, is a Dolby Cinema the current reference for what you can get in a theater with HDR?
Absolutely.
Yes, it is.
Absolutely.
Right? But what you see in a Dolby Cinema is specifically graded for the Dolby Cinema and nothing else.
Right.
So when we get content at home, we are not getting Dolby Cinema graded content that we're watching at home, not from any source. We're getting the home release. And if you're going to say there's no disadvantage with projectors and HDR, no, there is. No projector that gets as bright as HDR is supposed to be able to get. There are no flat panels that get as bright as HDR is supposed to be able to get in terms of just literally showing you the signal nit for nit, because HDR signals specify exact numbers of nits, and we are all currently compromising on that to a greater or lesser degree and having to use tone mapping to not show you exactly what the signal asked for, but to try and retain the detail as best we can, because we can't show 10,000 nits, we can't show 4,000 nits, but the signal might have asked exactly that many. So yes, there is a disadvantage to projectors. You are not going to see nit for nit accuracy on a projector. You just are not. And it is factually untrue that the reference for HDR images across the board is a Dolby Cinema. It is not. It is as good as cinema gets as far as HDR goes. That is correct. But we are not getting that at home, and it is not the HDR reference.
Second quote here: get the real HDR experience in the home, not what happens on TVs, but what happens in a Dolby Cinema, using premium Barco braggy CinemaScope projector, and MadVR is doing the video processing to make the rendering of HDR automatic, so no matter what the content was mastered at, it will always look perfect.
So all the things we talked about, the MadVR, like I say, when you see what the default settings are, you're actually seeing more detail, ironically, than the signal actually asked for. And then yes, everything that's going on there in terms of saying is this perfect? No, it's not perfect. It is absolutely unequivocally not bit for bit perfect for what the signal asked for. That is just flat out not true. But yes, the idea that the real HDR experience is a Dolby Cinema and what we're seeing on TVs, and there was because TVs are tone mapping, so is the MadVR and so is the projector. So it's just a different set of compromises. But they're trying to sell this, so okay.
So at a Dolby Cinema, you're seeing what they wanted you to see. That's the art created by the people who make the movies. We are replicating that, not emulating it, replicating it at home. I mean, I don't think
so. Are you seeing what they intended you to see at a Dolby Cinema? I have to agree with that, because like I say, it is graded specifically for a Dolby Cinema when you're watching it there. So is that what the content creators intended for you to see at a Dolby Cinema experience? Yes, I have to agree with that. But it is just, again, factually untrue that you're replicating that at home, because we're not getting the Dolby Cinema mastered content at home. You are emulating it. You're trying to get as close to it as you can with this processing, but we're using the home release that is a different grading than the Dolby Cinema release. So that is just a factually untrue statement.
Okay, so that's that. So that's our response. Secondly, also from Karl,
he had something there from Karl.
I thought there. So Karl's curious what our response is to this video. I mean, it's an advertisement.
Also here, so Karl's seen the demos in person. So
okay, all right.
He was able to get a deal on a MadVR Envy himself. It made the price a little bit more palatable. So yeah, he was wondering if we could as we discussed in the last question, we aren't super all for it, just for enthusiasts and that. So yeah, he's curious what our response is to the video. So I mean, here's the thing: I was pretty negative in those. Those were the choice quotes. Those were the quotes that I disagreed with. Those were the quotes that I pulled out. There was a bunch of stuff that he said that I was perfectly fine with, including saying, yes, the Dolby Cinema is like your best bet of where can I go to see what the content creator actually intended for me to see, outside of getting myself a $30,000 mastering monitor and showing bit for bit what the home release was really supposed to look like. What's the next best thing I can go to and be reasonably certain that I'm actually seeing exactly what the content creator wanted me to see? Yeah, Dolby Cinema, I agree with that. And the idea that is it as simple as buy any projector or television, plug it in, play some HDR content, and you have assurance that you're seeing exactly what the content creator intended? No, it isn't that simple. You're going to have to do some calibration and adjustment. So again, I agree that, if you have this all set up correctly and they're using the Dolby Cinema as the reference as far as projectors go, which is absolutely a reasonable thing to do. You're not going to try to make any projection setup look like the $30,000 mastering monitor that can actually hit 4,000 nits for real. So, using that as the baseline for comparison, trying to get as close to that as you can at home, all of that is reasonable stuff. You are trying to emulate it. You are not replicating it. That's complete, misuse of words in terms of the marketing that was going on there. It is not the reference for exactly what HDR is supposed to look like. But all that stuff aside, again, I'm fine with what they're selling there. I found it a bit ironic. He talked about DLP. They're like, yeah, DLP is what they use in the cinemas, so that's what you want to use at home. It's like, well, yeah, but the ones they use in the Dolby Cinema have 6 DLP chips, which you can get at home, but it's $450,000 to get the 6 DLP chip version at home. So even that is beyond what, high-end clientele are usually putting in there. So, it's not that it's DLP, it's that it's a very specific type of DLP being used in the Dolby Cinemas that you can't get at home to get the same black levels. So yeah, a bunch of stuff I disagreed with, but some of the general stuff. Will the end result, right? That's the overarching thing. Is the end result going to be really pleasing? Yes, it's going to be really pleasing. I've talked about this stuff before where I don't like that home theater in general seems to be getting more expensive, more gatekeeping. I don't like any of that. I don't like that if you're entry level, the only thing you can get is like a pretty crummy looking LCD TV and a sound bar. Like that's the entry level now. We have the home theater in a box is gone. A lot of the affordable stuff is getting more expensive. I don't like any of that. So this is fine for the people who have the money. You're going to have a great experience, but I'm not going to tell somebody who's wants to get into home theater or, is middle class and really enjoys home theater that you're missing out unless you have this.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. Lastly, Karl says, during CEDIA, JMAR Seating had partnered up with D-Box to demonstrate their 4D motion seating. Some of the videos were talking about it like it was a brand new thing. Karl knows D-Box has been in cinemas for over a decade. Were they not available for home theaters until only recently or something? That is a complete lie. They have been around for decades.
Oh, they've been around. I mean, what's new is JMAR partnering up. So, and the ones where they're talking about it being a new thing, it's specifically the JMAR partnership. That's new. That's fine. But yeah, I saw a couple of videos that he pointed to. I'm like, yeah, they're kind of talking about it like, oh, you've never had this experience before. But I mean, yeah, it was specifically with the JMAR partnership. So no, you could get D-Box seats at home. Now, that is not a tactile transducer. This is not you're connecting your subwoofer output to the D-Box chairs and you're getting shaken around. No, D-Box is a specific system where you have to actually have download a file that plays in conjunction with the movie. There's a separate D-Box processing unit, and you have to actually pay for and get the files for the D-Box files to go along with it. Now, there are people out there who have homebrewed their own, and they will actually create their own D-Box playback tracks for movies that don't have a D-Box, or if they don't want to pay to get it. There are people out there, and there's forum groups for the people who do that, and they create their own, but it's almost like creating your own soundtrack to go along with a movie. It's like a riff track, except it's a physical motion riff track that plays in synchronization with the movie and physically moves around the D-Box seat. So yeah, that has been available at home for quite some time. It's just the JMAR partnership that's new.
Yeah, that's and in fact that whole system that Rob's talking about, that also isn't new because that's the way it's always been. You had to. I remember if it give you an idea of how old this is, when Spider-Man 2, not the one with Andrew Garfield, but the one with Doc Ock,
Tobey Maguire.
Tobey Maguire. When that was out on DVD, D-Box, I saw a D-Box demonstration at a local home theater installation place that had, they described the whole process about how you had to download the file and how it sank up with what was happening on the screen, but all this other stuff. So this is not new. None of this is new. Nope. And I've never liked it. I don't think I ever will. There's so few times in my life have I wanted my chair to shake or to move around on its own.
Now, see, when I go to the movie theater, I do often get the D-Box ticket, not because I so much love the physically moving, but because those are the seats that have 2 armrests. Yeah. And I'm willing to pay for that. Yeah.
All right, who do we have left, Rob?
We have on our list Dazz and Keshaun. They will be first up next week.
All right, sounds good. Again, we want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Stefan and Andrew for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and leaving us a PayPal donation, as well as our 139 patrons over at patreon.com.
Indeed, Stefan and Andrew, thank you very much for the PayPal donations, and patreon.com/AVRant podcast is the place to go to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. Big thanks to our 139 patrons over there.
Also, I want to thank those who have thanked us for keeping the podcast going, including Shawn, Keshaun, Infinite Gary, Dazz, Mark, Stefan, Kris, and Rafael. Thank you for sending us some notes.
Yes, indeed. I'll say the names one more time. Shawn, Keshaun, Infinite Gary, Dazz, Mark, Stefan, Kris, and Rafael. Thank you all so much for sending us those notes of encouragement. We definitely appreciate them. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andrew.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.